So it seems that we've got a new Space Marine Terminator and Veteran formation stomping around. That seems to be an upgrade on the previous First Company task force. Let's talk about the Emperor's Shield, Darnath Lysander, and some new Imperial Fist rules. Hello and welcome back to Auspex Tactics, where today we're talking over a Space Marine rules update. And in this one we're going over the Imperial Fist, half of the rules that Games Workshop released about 12 hours ago. I've talked about the Raven Guard ones in a video previous to this. First up, let's take a quick look at Darnath Lysander and then get into the new Terminator formation. As we know, Lysander's got a new model coming out this week. He's the captain of the Imperial Fist's first company, and has been the only character for the Imperial Fist for quite some time until Tor Garadon came along in 40k. He's a bit of a veteran of old Warhammer 40k lore, plenty of background that he's fought against just all sorts of different foes out there, maybe most notably when he was captured and tortured by the hated Iron Warriors, but was able to fight free of his captors and returned with the might of the Imperial Fist to lay low their fortress world. He's been active in the era Indomitors, turning back all manner of foes from the Emperor's domain with the Great Rift opening, and still looking forward to enacting vengeance on the Iron Warriors Warsmith Sean 2 if he gets a chance. In battle he fights in Terminator plate with a massive relic Thunderhammer, the Fist of Dawn in one hand, handed down to him by the previous captain of the first when he was slain, and a great big storm shield called Rampart. The new model for the Imperial Fist captain went down rather well, showing off alongside a whole bunch of other chapter characters, and generally pretty well received in the upscale Terminator armour. He's got a head swap with a helmeted head if you want to use that, a cape fairly similar to his previous model over his right shoulder, and of course he's got a particularly fancy hammer and storm shield with some nice sculpted eagles on them. His price when his rules come out at the weekend should be £28, $45 or €35. If you are looking to either pick him up or the Imperial Fist Combat Patrol box set at the weekend, check out the channel's affiliate discount retailers linked down in the video description. They can save a bit versus Games Workshop prices, around about 10 to 20% off depending on where you are around the world. Here are the times when they go on pre-order: midnight Eastern Time in North America for Wargame Portal and Fenris Workshop in Canada, and then between 10 and midday for the rest of the world on Saturday morning. As well as Lysander, the Imperial Fist also have their Combat Patrol going live as well, which does seem to be a fairly popular one for Space Marine collectors in general. As ever, a big thank you to anyone buying things through the links in the video description. If you do pick stuff up, it does help to support Auspex Tactics. For Lysander's datasheet, they've chosen not to mess with it really. It seemed kind of likely that most of his rules would stay the same, judging by Vulcan Hestarn. The Forge Father of the Salamanders only had a few tweaks to his rules. It looks like the only change on Lysander's profile is that he's got 7 wounds rather than 6 now. He can still lead Terminators or Assault Terminators, and unless they change the balanced data slate at a future date, he'll still have that Inspiring Commander to make Terminator units all OC2, which is quite a useful buff for a durable unit that's quite likely to have a chance of surviving on the mid-board objectives. Overall though, I didn't really feel like he was a datasheet that needed enormous amounts of rules updates. He's still really quite a dangerous punchy character, 5 attacks hitting at strength 10, AP 3 and damage 3 with devastating wounds with the Fist of Dawn. That's pretty good for helping out against things that Terminators aren't quite so strong against. 3 wound infantry won't like that at all, and he will be able to punch up a bit more against say toughness 10 battle tanks. Otherwise his special rules are quite nice as well. It makes his squad -1 to wound for things that are greater than their toughness. Again, that's pretty nice on a unit that's already fairly chunky and tanky. And then for his relic Rampart shield, you get to trigger that once per game for its boosted effect. You have to declare it at the start of the phase, and then for that phase you get a 2+ invulnerable save for Lysander only. It's a genuinely very good defensive boost that should mean that Lysander's got a good chance of living through any one phase, but he will need to make a good judgment call as to when to trigger it, which might not necessarily be super obvious if he's in a big retinue. Are the opponents going to focus down his unit or not? Overall though, it still seems like a solid character, adding a bunch of punchy melee threat, making his Terminator squad tougher, and also Terminator squads in general better at holding objectives. For his 100-point cost, I'd say that's all pretty reasonable, though maybe not crazy enormous standout value over and above what other Terminator characters bring. Onto the second part of the rules updates for the Imperial Fist though, and this was somewhat of a surprise, given they'd updated the themed Salamanders detachment for Vulcan Hestarn. I was assuming that they'd update the themed detachments for each character in turn, and the Anvil Siege Force did seem one that would be quite good for an update really. It's the Imperial Fist sort of static gunline firepower one that did have some interesting rules, but also just hasn't really been played all that much out there in game. Its main issues are that it has firepower buffs that are locked to remaining stationary in an edition where it's kind of hard to do that with lots of terrain blocking lines of sight and needing to move to get line of sight and move up to objectives, and also new Oath of Moment giving a +1 to wounds didn't really help stack too much with its heavy benefits. I was kind of hoping and expecting they might do something to breathe a bit more life into it, but it seems that instead we've got a surprise. And instead I guess to go with Darnath Lysander and his first company, we're instead getting an updated version of the first company task force, but locked to Imperial Fists. Definitely interesting, and that's another one that lots of people would like to see a good update for. Though maybe a shame for people who might have hoped that the Imperial Fist bolter playstyle might get a buff. Let's get into the rules for it though, and this one's the Emperor's Shield Detachment. As mentioned, essentially it's an updated version of the first company task force. Like the other ones that we've seen so far, there's a special role for Lysander in it, and then a good number of the stratagems and enhancements are changed. I'd probably overall say that it's better than the first company task force, though that was quite a low bar to set, and there are some trade-offs where a few valuable things have been lost. This detachment is locked to Imperial Fist only. It doesn't necessarily mean that you couldn't play it with other chapters' heraldry, but in terms of characters that you can include in it, it would only be Lysander, Torgaradon, and I guess Pedro Cantor. In any case, the Emperor's Shield Detachment trades out the core rule for a new one from the first company task force. It's still Oath of Moment focused. The first company one basically gives you 4 rerolls to wound against the Oath of Moment targets, but only once per game. In the place of that, this one gives you reroll wound rolls of 1 against the Oath of Moment targets, but all game long. For Lysander's specific additional buff, his unit does get 4 rerolls to wound against the Oath target, and that's all game long once again. Overall, I would say it's a boost given that you get a small damage buff all game long as opposed to a big damage buff on one turn, but at the same time it doesn't really feel like the sort of rule that's going to really change the world. Reroll once to wound is essentially a plus 17% damage buff against a target that you're already quite good against. I guess it does mean that the thing that you've Oath of Moment marked is going to be even deader than it was before. There was a pretty reasonable chance that you might have taken big chunks out of it anyway. It's definitely not nothing though, and I guess that could reliably add to a fair bit of firepower damage multiple turns in a row. It won't affect literally every unit in the army all the time though. Things like Stern Guard with their reroll wounds against the Oath of Moment don't care, and anything that's either twin linked or has other sources of rerolls again won't see any benefit from the rule. For Lysander's bit of it, that is potentially at least fairly scary. Maybe he could be leading a unit of assault terminators with thunderhammers, and that means that even against things that are like toughness 11 or toughness 12, the whole squad will be wounding them on a 4+ with a boosted Oath of the Moment, and then re-rolling the wound roll. That'll give them a serious amount of wounds and plenty of devastating wounds thrown into. If he was leading a more standard Terminator squad, then I guess you could make his shooting fairly scary. Even with massive excessive buffs between Oath of Moment, rerolling all wounds, +1 to wound and Fury of the First though, it still seems like mostly AP0 Storm Bolters are going to struggle to break through in a crazy big way. I suppose it could help out some assault cannons or cyclone missile launchers well enough though. Overall I'd say that the detachment rule is an improvement compared with the big turn of reroll wounds, but not necessarily a big one. Next up we've got the enhancements. It seems that 2 of these are pretty similar to the previous first company one. One's sort of half ported from Anvil and one's new. The ones that don't appear here are the Feel No Pain one from the first company task force, a 5+ Feel No Pain for the bearer, and a once per game one for their squad. That is a shame as that was one of the better ones in my opinion, and also the Destroy Models for Battleshock one that was previously good with Reavers. That one doesn't make it in either. Going through what they do get is Indomitable Champion. That one's altered slightly from the Anvil Siege Force option. Rather than being Gravis locked, it's Terminator locked, and the first time that Terminator model is slain, it revives on death on a 2+, is set up outside of engagement range at the end of the phase, and returns with 3 wounds remaining. That doesn't seem too bad. Maybe could be interesting enough if you're using a lone Terminator character for perhaps utility purpose, going it alone, or just allow you to have a captain or ancient arise from the ashes to have 1 more turn of utility or damage dealing. Next up we've got Champion of the Feast, which is the same as the first company one, +1 attack to the bearer's melee weapons, and then once per game a +1 attack for their entire unit. That's the equivalent of the Imperium sword that's 25 points in the first company one. Seems nice enough for any melee character leading a fighty squad like Blade Guard, or I suppose Terminator's given this one. For Blade Guard I suppose it could even stack with an Ancient. Next up there's Disciple of Rhetoricus. This one's Terminator locked and is basically the same as an OC one from the first company once again. The bearer's OC characteristic is better by 1, and you have a bonus +1 to their squad once per battle, which I guess you could just save to trigger if it makes sense. That's not necessarily the worst thing to have on the midboard, and the first company version is cheap I suppose at 10 points. Could be an okay points filler if nothing else and you had an enhancement slot spare. Finally we've got one called the Maladraxian Shroud, which seems like it's a new one. That one's locked to ancient models only, and this one gives your unit a -1 to wound if the strength of the attack is higher than their toughness characteristic. That one's a nice enough debuff. I guess you could use it on a Terminator Ancient for another unusually tanky Terminator squad to go alongside Lysander. It's maybe a shame that it overlaps with Lysander though, so there's not really any value in having this in the same unit unless the opponent's got +1 to wound on the go. I guess it could also be solid enough for Blade Guard as well. Most attacks coming at them will be wounding them on a 3+ or better. Overall, the enhancements seem okay. That Ancient one seems potentially useful, as does the melee boost one. Revive on Death seems alright, but it would likely lead to your lone Terminator character being really quite expensive. Then moving on to the stratagems, as with the first company task force, the vast majority of these are locked to Terminator or Veteran squads, so almost everything is only applicable to Terminator's Blade Guard, Stern Guard or Vanguard veterans. Compared with the first company, there's 2 stratagems that are just lost, a -1 damage when your unit's charged. That one was potentially alright, but it sort of requires being charged by the right thing, and a fairly useless one's been removed as well for Battle Shock when you scored a kill. For the ones that are here, Armour of Contempt remains here and unchanged, the same as usual, reducing AP against one unit. It'll still be nerfed by the balance data slate. Then one of the more potentially useful stratagems, Fury of the First, has been buffed. Again, it affects those veteran style units. You get a +1 to hit this phase, so they should normally be hitting on a 2+, I guess maybe a 3+ for Thunderhammers, but now the additional +1 to wound benefit has been made a bit easier. You now get that additional buff if the unit's below its starting strength at all, and it doesn't have to just be below half strength. Overall seems like a nice enough improvement, at least it's quite a lot more likely to trigger the improved bit of it. Maybe not too hard to plug into, just a little bit more damage for any of the veteran units. Next up, and maybe one of the bigger gains for the detachment, is Obdurate Vengeance. This one seems to be completely new, replacing one of the previous, and it basically gives you Fights on Death 3+ for a veteran unit. It has the normal restrictions for a Fight on Death stratagem. You have to choose it when you've been targeted. It's got to be on one of those veteran units, and then provided your model hasn't already fought this phase, it can fight on death on a 3. Overall, that's a pretty solid one for Terminators or Blade Guard, I suppose, and quite nice that it goes off on the boosted 3+ as opposed to the more standard 4+ that plenty of armies get. Certainly seems like that could be interesting when your squad's charged. I guess that still gives you a bunch of value for a unit that's about to get attacked very hard in the fight phase. Next up, we have Wrathful Conquerors, which is unchanged bar the name. This one's a sticky objective one that's triggered by a Terminator or veteran unit in your movement phase. So basically you could move on to an objective in the midboard potentially, then activate this, and then that point will remain under your control for the rest of the game, at least until the opponent can take it from you. That one seems pretty handy and a bit better than the standard sticky objective option, so you can trigger it after a move as opposed to just being locked to before. Being locked to veteran units maybe isn't ideal, even if they will make up a lot of this detachment, I guess. Plenty of times the units that might have wanted to trigger this might be these more sort of Space Marine skirmish ones. Next up, for one command point, there's Disciplined Extermination. This one's a new one. It's a shooting buff to the Terminator or veteran units, and your ranged attacks from that unit get to ignore cover, and they boost their AP by -1. The main downside of this one is the choice of units that you can target with it. Stern Guard veterans maybe seem like the obvious one, given that they do have some fearsome firepower, but at the same time they've got lots of devastating wounds which are their main source of damage, and neither AP1 nor ignore cover will make any benefits to devastating wound attacks. Otherwise, Terminator shooting still isn't really going to get particularly efficient, even with those buffs on the go. I guess it could get at least fairly punchy if you had Darnath Lysander and a big Terminator squad with Stormbolters all firing out with that against the Oath targets. I suppose if you had 4 rerolls, hits, wounds, and +1 to wound, and then you have ignores cover and extra AP, Stormbolters are actually genuinely going to start dealing some damage there. It would still be quite a lot of commitment though, and a massive points investment just to get that active. Finally, I guess you could use it on Vanguard veterans and their fancy pistols. I guess in theory if you had an entire squad with grav pistols that could actually be somewhat scary. Overall though, I think realistically this one might not get used all that much unless you specifically build around it. I'm not sure that building around it is definitely a good idea. Then finally, for one command point, we've got Dropship Extraction. This one's very similar, and it's a Terminator unit return to reserves as before. As with other return to reserve stratagems, it triggers at the end of the enemy fight phase, and you can't use it if your Terminator squad is in engagement range. Technically, I guess it's had a very slight buff. Previously it stated that you had to bring the unit down in your next reserves phase. Now if you don't want to, then you don't have to. So you could save them off the board to come down later in the game if there wasn't a good way to get value out of them this turn. Though I feel like most of the time it's going to make sense to have them on the board, as if they're not on the board, they're not dealing damage or gaining utility from objectives. So most of the time you probably would want to bring them down straight away anyway. Unfortunately, it's not a particularly good way to deliver Terminators to melee. You're still going to be dropping down and then at the mercy of a 9-inch charge. Even with a reroll, you're odds on to fail that charge. It could still be something though if a Terminator squad is very out of position and he wants to push on the next rank of the enemy, or could be an option if you've got Terminators on the board turn 1, the opponent takes first turn, and then you could return some guys to reserve to drop them straight down against the enemy on your turn 1, effectively giving you a turn 1 Terminator deep strike. Overall, I feel like both sets of rules are interesting enough. Lysander was already solid enough for his cost, though maybe not crazy standout compared with other Terminator characters. Him having an extra wound doesn't hurt, and I guess if you liked him before, then you'd like him now. For the Emperor's Shield detachment, I'm a bit more mixed. It does seem a bit better than the first company task force to me, that maybe not hugely meaningfully so. The Fights on Death does seem like a solid enough win. The core rule seems more useful than the original one, as does the Fury of the First Stratagem to allow some extra +1 to wound damage if your squad's even slightly depleted, and I guess you could have 2 tanky Terminator units with Lysander and the Ancients. All that's in the context of the detachment being super weak before though. I don't really feel like the buffs are quite spectacular enough to really turn that around. Having all the synergies locked to a few veteran units is a bit frustrating as well, at least compared with the start of the edition. Most of them are better datasheets than they were before, though still the standard Space Marine Terminators are rather lacking compared with their peers in other chapters. Maybe could be a bit more of an interesting detachment if Space Marine Terminators got super efficient and a really powerful unit in their own right. If they aren't changing rules though, I feel like they'd have to drop in cost quite a bit to make that so. In any case, let me know your thoughts on the detachment down in the comments below. What do you make of the Emperor's Shield? Will you be looking to try it out in game or not? And what sort of units would you be tempted to put on the table with it? As mentioned, if you're looking to pick up Mr. Lysander, the Imperial Fist Combat Patrol, or any of the other 40k stuff this weekend, check out the affiliate links down in the video description. They help to support the channel, and here are the times when pre-orders go live around the world. I'll leave that there for now though. Feel free to subscribe to Auspex Tactics if you'd like to see more like this. I'll certainly keep the regular 40k videos coming. I do have new ones just about every day. If you'd like to support the channel a bit more directly, Auspex Tactics does have a Patreon page as well, and you can find that linked in the video description. Channel patrons get a few advantages, seeing certain videos early, regular votes to see what sort of things come next on the channel, and automatic entry into the regular prize giveaways with a chance to win some big model kits each month. If any of that sounds good to you, or you'd just like to help support, the link's down in the video description. In any case, a massive thank you for listening, and I'll hope to see you guys next time.